Hey everybody, I'm so glad you're here for this episode. It's going to be awesome. It's all about the Sabbath. What is it? Is it Saturday? Is it New Testament? Is it Old Testament? All that good stuff coming up real quick. Let's jump in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Hearth, where the only place you ought to build a fire is on top of a firm foundation. I'm your host, Elijah Bowers. Let's jump right in. So in Exodus 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." And so this is kind of a controversial commandment because there's all kinds of opinions over should we go to church on Sunday, should we go on Saturday. Entire denominations have sprung out of that argument. Let's just forget what everybody is saying about it and let's go to the scriptures. So the scriptures say this in Colossians 2, 16 and 17. "Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of any holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." Let's jump into Romans 14, 5 and 6. "One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord. He that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not, to the Lord he eateth not, and giveth God thanks." Now, so that would kind of imply that there's nothing wrong with keeping a Sabbath, which, of course, for the Jews, the Sabbath would be from sundown on Friday, or really kind of 6 o'clock on Friday to 6 o'clock on Saturday, sundown to sundown. And that would be the Jewish Sabbath. Here we see a couple of things that are really important. Number one, Paul taught that it really didn't matter if you kept a literal Sabbath. So as we've entered into the New Testament, we know that there is no necessity of any particular day being your Sabbath. All right, well then this commandment doesn't count. Video's over. Y'all have a good night. Obviously there's more to it than that. But the necessity of the day has been removed in the New Testament. But it's really important what he said in Colossians, that this and many other things are shadows. So there's a revelation to be understood. We know that when the Gentiles, this isn't in my notes, when the Gentiles who are without the law fulfill the things that are contained in the law, right? So what's he talking about? He's talking about the shadow. There's a revelation in the law that can be kept without the actual law itself. Let's jump into Galatians and see Paul get a little bit more stirred up on some of this stuff. But this is Galatians 4, verse 9 through 11. "But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage? Ye observe days and months and times and years, and I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain." So what's Paul saying here? Well, to break that down, Paul is saying You were delivered out of a religious system. Of course, he's talking to, a Greek system or a Roman system. This pantheon of gods and these special holy days and these little ceremonies and all the stuff that you thought was going to get you favor with the gods and was going to get you, blessings from the gods, and you did all this stuff. And now you have not only known God, but God has known you. God knows you by name. You've been filled with his spirit, all these things. And now you're going to turn again to what he calls the weak and beggarly elements of the world. You're now that you have known the true and living God and have been known of him, you've heard his voice. Now you're going to be worried about a day of the week. Now you're going to be worried about the phases of the moon, about certain times and years and superstitions. Now you're going to go back. And so we see here that Paul really fought against this carnality of the natural days and times and holy days and holidays and new moons and Sabbaths. He really pressed against that stuff. He didn't want his people involved in it. So let's go to Philippians 3 and see a little bit more of this. This is Philippians 3, verses 3 through 10. For we are the circumcision which worship God in the Spirit. It's in the Spirit, it's not in the flesh. And rejoice in Jesus Christ, and have no confidence in the flesh, though I might also have confidence in the flesh. If any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is of the law, blameless. But what things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I might win Christ, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, that I may know him in the power of his resurrection and in the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death. And so, again, you see here, Paul's able to boast and say, I did the whole law thing. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. I was of the tribe. I was a real Israelite, not you, like you Gentiles trying to pretend like you were Jews. I was a real one. And he said, I did all this stuff, and I really thought it was gaining me ground, keeping all of these laws. But what I found out was all that's like dung. All of that can be done away with in Christ. And so Paul was very, very careful that we understood that it's the spiritual and the moral matters of the law that are important, not the carnal commandments to wash this way and don't do any work on this day and offer this kind of a blood sacrifice. We have fulfilled all of that in Jesus. Now, how is the Sabbath fulfilled in Jesus? We're going to get to that a little bit later. But let's just keep talking about this idea of the Sabbath being a shadow. So if its importance lies in the fact that it's a shadow, then what is it the shadow of? Well, one thing you could see in that Sabbath is the millennial reign of Christ. We know that Jesus is coming back. He's going to set his foot down on a Mount of Olives. The Bible said, this same Jesus that you see go away shall return in like manner. So the way you see him leaving in bodily form into the heavens, that's the same way you're going to see him come back. And that was out of the mouth of an angel. And so we know he's coming back. When he comes back, he's going to clean this mess up. Thank God. So it doesn't really matter who wins the election this year. It doesn't matter who wins the next election or any of that other stuff. It doesn't matter if America stands or falls. We have a king who is coming back. Praise the Lord. But so when he comes back, he's going to institute a millennial reign, which is going to be a rest for the earth. It'll be the final day of the earth. Of course, Number 8, new beginnings. You get to the next stage of creation, and we find out that he has consumed the heavens and the earth with a fervent heat, right? And so, but that millennial reign, it's a rest for the land. You know, the Sabbath, the land, also the fields that they would farm, those also got sabbatical times. They had entire sabbatical years. Jubilee itself is a Sabbath of Sabbaths. It's really a Sabbath year of Sabbath years, because you have these 7-year cycles, right? And with these sabbatical years, and then you get all the way to 7 times 7, that's 49. The 50th year is the Sabbath of all Sabbaths. It's the Jubilee. So, but it's not just a shadow of that, even though that would warrant maybe its own video, but it's also of the new covenant salvation. Let me read you something. This is Hebrews 4, verse 3. For we which have believed do enter into rest. As he said, as I've sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he spake in a certain place of the 7th day, that's the Sabbath, on this wise, and God did rest the 7th day from all his works. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. Again, he limiteth to a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, for if Jesus, and that's just the Greek transliteration for the name Joshua. So it's actually talking about Joshua in the book of Joshua. For if Joshua had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day? There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his. So how do we unpack that? What does that mean? Well, what the author of Hebrews is trying to get across is, because there's this prophecy that David gave that said they're going to enter into my rest. We know that that's not the rest of the promised land, because he wouldn't have had to reiterate this promise through David if Joshua had led them into the rest that is a rest from their slavery and a rest from their wanderings in the desert. And so because he said it through David, we know that it's still yet to come. And he also points out that the entire idea of the Sabbath is that all 6 days I have worked and I have done my own labor, but on the 7th day, I'm going to enter into God's rest because he completed the work. And so that's what we believe about salvation. We believe as Christians that no work, nothing that I do can cause me to be saved. I can't quote and affirm a creed. I can't do any kind of righteousness. I can't give to the poor enough. I can't do enough works at my church. I can't preach the gospel and be saved because of it. I can't be baptized a certain way and be saved because of it. There's nothing in my own labor that I physically can do to save myself. The only way that I can be saved is I have to enter into the rest of God. I have to let Jesus do my righteous works for me. And so that's what he's talking about. And so then we see that the author of Hebrews is drawing a parallel between the Sabbath and how they were every single week. They had to be aware that there was a time that they could work and they were required to work for 6 days. And yet on the 7th day, it came down to not working. And so then, of course, every 7 years they had this happen. And then in the year of Jubilee, they had it happen 2 years in a row. So everybody in their lifetime for 2 years would not work a field, would not work in their labor, because God was trying to get it across that in the last days, it won't be the works of the law. It won't be the labors of your hands, but it is absolutely 100% going to be Jesus, the work that he did on Calvary that will save our souls. So we see here that the Sabbath is a shadow, but it's not just a shadow, but it's also a mentality. Now, let me bring you right back to Exodus. Remember the Sabbath. That's what he said to do. Remember the Sabbath. And so we understand then that this commandment is the commandment of the mind. You can see where God said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, all thy strength, and all thy mind. We'll get later into loving the Lord with your strength, which are the commandments of your hands. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, right? You have to be strong and control yourself and control your lusts and urges, and that's how you love him with your strength. And we've already talked about loving him with the soul, having no other gods before me, loving him with the heart, not graving images and giving him the wholeness of the heart. But here we're talking about loving God with the mind. Remember, right? So the Sabbath wasn't just, you just do it, right? But it was a place in your mind that, in other words, don't let the Sabbath slip totally out of your mind, but it has to be somewhere right at the front of your thinking, because it's not like you just woke up on Saturday and it's like, oh, it's Saturday, I don't have to work today. But it was the fact that your work had to get done, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but your work had to get done. So you had to plan your week around your day off. You had to make sure everything got done, because it wasn't like you could pull a Saturday if you had to. You could not do it. And so you had to bear it in mind. You had to plan your life around this Sabbath. And so it's a mentality that the Sabbath is supposed to be a prioritization of thoughts and actions around this restful time in your life. So the sin there would then be that the Sabbath is absent from the mind, that you're not living your life for Sabbath. You're not planning your life around Sabbath. And we'll get kind of into what that means for us in just a little bit, because we'll talk about what the Sabbath means today. But just think about that, though, that it's a mentality. The Sabbath is a place of the mind, and it's also holiness, right? And now we don't say holiness to refer to anything that a man has called holiness, but when we say holiness, we, of course, are Bible-believing people, so we just mean what the Bible means. And so holy means to be sanctified, set apart, to be different, to be unlike other things. And so God is the litmus test for holiness, because he said, be ye holy, even as I am holy, right? And so holiness is likeness unto God. It's godliness. It's God-likeness. Let us make man in our image and in our likeness. That's the holiness. Keep it holy. The word keep, of course, means guard. Back in medieval times, when, and I guess 1600s is still considered medieval times, but I guess that's maybe the Enlightenment. The word keep, of course, means to guard. We know that back in the day, they would build castles and walls and fortresses, and those fortified places would be called a keep. And so the word keep in English used to mean to guard, not just kind of hold on to it and don't lose it, but it meant actually to set a watch over it and to fight for it. And so he's telling us not only to remember it, but it's also something we have to guard it, the holiness of it. We have to watch over and protect the holiness. So then Sabbath is not only a mentality, but it is a separation from the rest of the world. It's a refusal to partake in the profanity, and I don't mean profanity like cussing or something like that, but I mean the profaneness, the profanity, the commonality of the world, right? But the Sabbath is the separation from that. Sabbath is instead partaking in the nature or the values or the attributes of God. Like I said, if it's holy, right? Holiness is God. It's who God is. And so when we are holy, it's holy as He is holy. And so if keeping Sabbath is holy, then it's a partaking of the nature of God. Now, God doesn't it's not like God doesn't answer prayers on Saturday. It's like God doesn't stop doing things in our lives because it's Saturday. So we know that, again, it's not like a physical day with God, but it's a day of the Lord. It's a restfulness that is in the nature of God, and that He pulled out. He stopped working and taking part in the creation that He had just made. And so that's the mentality and that's the holiness that God's expecting out of us. Hi, everybody. We'll be right back in just a minute, but I got to take a moment and ask you for just a little bit of help. You see, me and Kate have started this endeavor of putting out content, and we've had to buy equipment. We're looking at buying more equipment. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of our time and our energy, hours and hours of labor go into every single video, and we do it all by ourselves. And we're happy to do it because it's the ministry. But just like everything else in the ministry, we ask people that are able to give, if you can help us, we would very much appreciate it if you could just stop right here, go to burninglightsministries.com/giving, or if you wanted to partner with us monthly, that would be awesome. You go to burninglightsministries.com/partnership. All the links are in the description, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, all that's included. And so anything that you can send us or give to us is going to be so very much appreciated. And you're helping us spread the gospel, whether it's through this content or whether it's on the road. You're helping us put up tents. You're helping us preach in churches and win souls and heal the sick, to totally fulfill the Great Commission, just as Jesus commanded us to. And so thank you so much for every gift, for every bit of help, for every partnership. We really, really need it. The gospel needs it. And we know that God is going to bless you. We believe we're good ground. And if you believe in what we're doing, and not just the online part, but if you believe in what we're doing, how we preach and how we, anything that you send is helping us. You're sowing into our field. And I really believe you're going to reap something awesome. Okay. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to let you go right back to your episode. All right. The Sabbath is an industriousness, because what did He say? He said, do all thy works, all of your labor in 6 days. So He didn't say, just do 6 days worth and then just take one off, and then whatever gets left out, gets left out. No, He said, finish the work a day early. There should be nobody in the world any harder of a worker than the Judeo-Christian people, because we have a commandment from God. Everything you do, do it heartily unto the Lord. Do all your work in 6 days. You should be working harder and working faster than other people, right? Whatever your hand finds to do, you should do it with all your might. And so that the Sabbath was not an injunction. It's like, we're going to sit around and be lazy on Saturdays because we're religious people. No, it wasn't that. It was, you should be working harder and faster and with a greater spirit of excellence, and you should be pushing and pressing, because you've got to get all that everybody else is doing done, but you've got to do it early because you've got to do something for me. So the first thing that happens when you take on this Sabbath mentality and you begin to bring this holiness into your life is you find out that there is a limitation of labor in your life. You don't get to be dominated by labor. You don't get to be controlled by your labor, but you begin to have to take control and subdue the earth, if you will, subdue the labor that you're taking part in. Because, we have to remember that work and labor is the curse. We could define labor as an exchange of the life of the person, right? Because your life is your time and your energy, your essence. So it's an exchange of the life of the person for resources which can sustain or enrich life. The curse in Genesis 3:17 is this. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of your life. Thou thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth unto thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. So you see there, that curse is you have to exchange yourself to the ground so that the ground will give you food. You have to trade your life now for the very things that are going to sustain your life. And so what we can't mistake here is that the curse of man is work, and Sabbath is the God-given escape from the curse. It's the lifting of the burden of the curse one day a week. And so that curse of labor, it's really a reduction, that if you let that become the tyrant in your life, then what it begins to do is it begins to reduce you down to a potential for labor, and your life becomes a sort of a currency, that the exchange there becomes a transaction, that it's not just I'm trading some of my life for the resources, but now I'm so enslaved that I am just currency in a transaction. And so, what we find out is that when you keep this mentality of the limitation of labor, which is Sabbath, you can't reduce yourself or anyone else down to nothing but the potential for what they can do for you or what resources they can bring to you. And so really, on some kind of a philosophical level, being a manipulative person is a breaking of Sabbath, because you're enslaving people to your own ends. You're reducing people down to what they can provide for you. But what the Sabbath does is it's a holy mentality, that there is something that supersedes my life and even the sustaining of my life. There's something that supersedes, right? We've already been through these commandments about how there's something bigger than my family. There's something bigger than my dreams. There's something bigger than my plan. There's something bigger than my ministry. And it's the Lord God Almighty. And so I have a responsibility to enter into what He's got, to enter into His presence, to enter into His power, to enter into His rest. And that necessitates me ceasing from my labors. My life can't be about making money. My life can't be about keeping a clean house or raising kids or any of the other things that we have to do and we are commanded to do. He said, do all your work. So it's not like we get out of it just because we have another thing to enter into, but we have to work twice as hard as the world. We have to press twice as hard as the world because we have another more important responsibility. And so I can't reduce myself to the potential for how much money I can make or how big of an impact I can make or how many followers I can get on social media. I can't reduce myself down to what I can get from me. And I can't reduce my children into what I can get from them or my wife or my spouse or my employees. I can't have that mentality. I have to have the mentality that labor is good, labor is necessary, labor is the necessary burden laid upon the shoulders of man by God Himself, and God expects us to do that, but it has to stay within its bounds. It has to stay within its limitations, right? So we have to reprioritize labor in our lives, and we have to acknowledge and recognize what is the purpose and what is the proper role for labor and work in my life according to the eyes of God. Let me read you something from Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. There is nothing better for a man. That'll get your attention. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight, wisdom and knowledge and joy. So, what Solomon has discovered in his wisdom is that it's not that we labor for labor itself. Neither do we labor to just store up money. Savings is good. Have a savings. Investments are good. Go ahead and invest. All that stuff is good. But if you don't enjoy the fruit of the labor, then Solomon said you're missing the best part of your life, of your natural carnal life. Of course, he's not bringing spiritual things into this, but it's important to realize that the best thing you can do with your labor is you invest in yourself and in your family, in your church, in your community. It should be an investment, not just wisdom and knowledge, but also joy. God gives that which is good in his sight. And so, it would be a shame to work overtime and work and labor and push and press and miss your kids growing up and not spend good quality time with your kids spending that money together. And that's not to say we spend it all. We know that we need to invest in their futures. We know that we need to invest in their security, but we also need to invest in them and enjoy the fruit of that. Eat and drink and rest and labor and be happy and enjoy your life, and don't let labor and making money and accruing resources and storing up resources be so important. Remember what Jesus said in the parable. He said, I didn't even have enough room to store all of my goods. I'll just tear down my barns and build bigger barns, and it's going to be awesome. And God spoke to him and he said, you're such a fool. Your soul is required of you this night. You've not taken care of your soul. You've not taken care of what's really important. You're so busy making money. And we have to labor and we have to have money. And in 6 days we do that. But there has to be a limitation on that. And there has to be a willingness to understand that at least a portion of the fruit is for our enjoyment and for our joy. Righteously so. We don't want to carouse around and do evil with our money, in the sake of having fun. It's not about fun, but it's about partaking of the fruits of your labor. And so, the other thing that the labor is supposed to do is it's supposed to create a space. I'm not going to get this right. College was a long time ago, and this is not in my notes. But I think it was Maslow. It was a psychologist, and he had the hierarchy of needs. And what you find out is the philosophical needs and the emotional needs and the spiritual needs cannot even be approached or thought about or touched when you're hungry, when you're starving to death, when you're sick, when you're unsafe. And so you have these physical needs. And when you are physically taken care of, it opens up a space in your life to meditate on his law day and night. It opens up a space in your life to pray and seek God, to wonder. It's hard to wonder where the stars came from when you don't even know where your next meal's going to come from, right? And so part of the function of labor is to free your mind, from worrying about where's your next breath come from, or is my child going to live through the night, or, what have you. Once you have that safety and security and you have that food and that sustenance around you, you are now free to meditate and to think and to pray and to read and to search out the scriptures and to find God, to fellowship with God. So what you'll find out by reading the book of Acts is you'll find out that Paul knew where he could find Jews. All he had to do was wait for the Sabbath. And every Sabbath day, he could find those Jews in the synagogue. If you don't believe me, just check out Acts 13, 15, 17, and 18. All 4 chapters mention this. And so it's a recurring thing. Paul would constantly go find the Jews in the synagogue at the Sabbath. And so we see in the scriptures that part of Sabbath life became, they couldn't go all the way to the temple because they were in other countries, but they could assemble themselves together and worship God together. And you also got to think that these are cultures where a lot of people aren't literate. And even if you are literate, because the Jews were more literate than probably most cultures around them, for the sake of the scriptures. But the fact is that it was very, very expensive because there was no printing presses. So, books had to be copied by hand. That was somebody's full-time job, and especially a holy book and a book as big as at least the Old Testament at this point. It would take a lot of time. I think I read one time it might have taken a year for a scribe to produce, so you've got to pay, if you want a Torah, then you're going to have to pay a guy's yearly wage. So, what's that now? $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, something like that. Somewhere in that ballpark is how much a book costs of this magnitude. So, like most people couldn't afford a book. So if you wanted the scriptures, you go to the synagogue. You go get a priest to read it to you. You see that in the Old Testament, Nehemiah, and some of them did that. I don't have that in my notes. But you understand that all of these things, this prayer, worship, assembly, these are the things the Jews were doing on the Sabbath. And so as we go kind of back through this, we find out that what does it mean to remember the Sabbath? It means keep the fellowship with God. Keep that rest that you find in His presence. That's where your peace is at. Your peace is found calling on His name, studying the scriptures, meditating on those. There has to be a place where you shut your mind off worrying about tomorrow. Shut your mind off worrying about your job. You shut your hands down trying to always do something. And believe me, I got 3 kids. I got a ministry. I've got a podcast I'm running. I've got all kinds of stuff that I'm doing. And so it's so easy for me to get into that mindset of, I feel like I'm in this constant place of there's chaos, right? Entropy. There's chaos, and it's creeping in. It's always coming in. And if I'll labor every minute, I can keep it out. But the minute I stop laboring, it just begins to come in. And so it's easy to get in that mindset. I don't want chaos to break out, so I just need to just keep working. But there has to be this place where we pull back, where we say, you know what? I can labor later. I have to pray. I have to seek God. I have to get close to God. I have to enter into that rest. That if the work of God is it's so important, but it's not important enough for God to work on the seventh day. If God took space to rest, then I need to take space to rest. And that space to rest is my enjoyment of the labor. It's my fellowship with the Lord. It's the bolstering of my family and my relationships. And so it's so important. And you can do the Saturday thing if you want to. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as you don't put your faith in it as if it's salvific. But the point is this, that it doesn't have to be from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. In fact, what we find out is Jesus is our Sabbath. He is the holy day. He is that place that when you step into His presence, you have made it to the Sabbath. That when you're with Jesus, you're in your sabbatical year. When you're with Jesus, it's the year of Jubilee. The captives are being set free. And so, on the year of Jubilee, it would start in the temple, and all across the land of Israel in the ancient times, they had men standing, this is in the Bible, they have men standing at the ready with trumpets. And on the Sabbath, or the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, which is the Jubilee, when it would begin, they would begin to sound the trumpet. And as this trumpeter heard this trumpet, he would begin to play. And as this one heard that guy, he would begin to play. And that sound would just begin in the presence of God, and it would go forth all across the land, and everyone that would hear it would just repeat it. And so what that reveals is there's a sound in the presence of God that sets the captive free. On the year of Jubilee, when the slaves heard that sound, they cast their shackles off. Their labor was over. When the debtors heard that sound, they knew they didn't have to make any more payments because their debt was over. They were finally free from their obligations. When those that had been so poor that they sold the family farm just to make ends meet, when they heard that sound, they walked back to the place of their childhood and they set their feet on that ground again because it was given back. It was a restoration of that which had been lost. And so what we find is that is who Jesus is. And if we don't take the time to say, you know what, I'm not working any more overtime this week. I'm not doing any more dishes tonight. I'm going to pray. I'm going to seek God because in his presence, there's a sound. And if I hear that sound will go on the inside of me. And then I can open up my mouth and I can give forth that sound. And that sound is going to set my children free. That sound is going to affect my church. It's going to affect my community. It's going to affect all the people around me. And so I have to take the time to get in my Sabbath and hear that sound. And so bear that as your mentality. And then when you realize what that Sabbath really is, you understand this is holy. Saturday is not holy. This is holy. And if it's Saturday, in my life, it's usually Monday. Mondays and Tuesdays are usually my days off. But it doesn't matter. The truth is you should have Sabbath every day. Sabbath should be a part of your daily life. There should be a daily hour where you pull back. There should be and pray. There should be a daily hour when you pull back and you read the scriptures. There should be, weekly times when you gather together in your home church, faithful to that, because that's your Sabbath. That's where you get that sound that's going to transform your life. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, give it a like, give it a subscribe, ring the bell. Also, wherever you get your podcasts at, check us out on BurningLightsMinistries.com. I hope to see you again real soon.